Good evening and welcome to another weekly markets review brought to you by SG Futures, coming at you today on Sunday the 24th of January 2021. And what we've seen last week, albeit it was a relatively shortened trading week, was overall quite an interesting week's worth of trade. When we did our weekly video last week, we said there was a couple of slightly bearish signals out there, that nothing that was going to send us out totally short all the US markets at the moment, but just some nuances that we thought may be a little bit bearish. As I said, we had a shortened trading week, so we had nothing trading on Monday. We came in on Tuesday, had a little bit of a sideways day, and then on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we really rallied quite hard, and that's probably on the back of the president's inauguration in the US. So I will just mark off the week that was. So that's this series of candles in here. And we can see here on Monday, this was just a Globex session, but on Tuesday we tested some highs and some lows and closed pretty much where we opened. And then on Wednesday we had the big enormous gap up. Thursday looked at some new highs and then came off, closed a bit lower, and then on Friday we actually touched off the very top of a balance area at 38.23, and these lines marked off on the chart, I'll just mark them off in here, represent lines from a previous video where we talked about the importance of this particular balance area in here. We deem that to be quite important because what we have there is agreement between buyers and sellers, and corresponding over here is that we've got a good chunk of volume appearing in there. We can argue that that is a well auctioned area, and the market probably doesn't need to return there once it's already broken out. That doesn't mean to say it won't return there, but these are well auctioned prices and there's been agreement between buyers and sellers. And then when we broke higher, there was an acceptance that sellers were now only really willing to step in at much higher prices, so the price obviously rose. Friday was a really interesting day in that we touched off the high of that balance area. Overall, this market is still incredibly bullish, given that we had predicted maybe that we would see some downside this week or some consolidation or perhaps even a return back to this area down here. We had thought we might see some of that, but given the complete lack of sellers across this market at the moment, it's hardly surprising that on Wednesday and Thursday we printed some new all-time highs. So currently I would have said on Wednesday and Thursday we were getting quite extended away from our 20-day moving average, which is just down here in the pink line. And then on Friday, we've pulled back a little bit and we've touched off the top of this balance zone. So we're giving the 20-day moving average some time to catch up with price action, given that it's a lagging price indicator. So as we come into this week, really this particular balance zone in here is what we're paying attention to, depending on where the futures open this evening, how trade goes overnight in response to the European session. We may see acceptance inside this particular balance area in here, or we may see it as support. So that'll be one area we'll be looking out for at the regular trading hours open tomorrow afternoon GMT. So the levels are marked out there: 38.23, 37.63 to the downside. I would deem 37.80 to be a pretty important price, in that it's these levels tend to repeat themselves. If you've followed any of our videos, it's usually something around the 79, 80, 81, 82 sort of level on the ES, and this is another one that we would deem to be an important order flow level, given the, I will mark it out for you, just given these couple of low volume nodes in there. But it's something we would just keep an eye on and would look for price to pivot off there. That's an area where if you watched it on the ladder, on the depth of market, that we saw the price rebound quite nicely off that. To the upside, if we see price breaking to the upside, we have 38.80 on the nose. I've got it marked out there at 0.75, just I'm a bit lazy, I don't want to bring it back, but it's 38.80 on the nose. And that is the next logical step for this market as a potential resistance area. So that would be a key price that we would see come into play this week. Over and above that, we would see 3900 as being an important level. It's a nice round number. Could be a level that the market tends to pivot off. And then over and above that, we would look at sort of 3920, 3923 as some short-term targets for any longs. But ultimately, the key message we've taken from this week is just there is literally nobody willing to be short this market in any sort of a serious way, and we need to add that to our narrative. Rather than going in this week and trying to blindly sell rallies, we sat on our hands waiting for dips, and the dips never really came. There was potentially some areas to be bought on Wednesday, but they were really just short-term scalps. There was no real decent swing trade out there that you could really throw the house at and sit in for 5-6 hours during an RTH session. So we spent a lot of last week just sitting on our hands, actually looking at other markets completely, as this one is just devoid of sellers. I'm really wary of shorting this market, and I prefer instead to buy the dips, and just the dip never came. There was nothing favourable. There was nothing that I deemed to be probable enough to warrant getting into. So that's things from a daily candlestick perspective on the E-mini S&P 500. What we will do next is just jump across into our weekly market profile view. So what we have marked out here inside this white box in here is the weekly profile, and we can see that it's a pretty fragmented profile. Granted, it was a shortened week, but we do have quite a big gap in the middle of the profile, which we can just mark out there. We have some single prints as well, and we would deem that area to be pretty important coming into this week. We would say it'll be an area which we would look to potentially pivot off, given that we've got quite a big gap in the middle of the profile, and that represents the gap between Tuesday and Wednesday. That's the gap higher on inauguration day. We'd be really interested this week to see how price responds if we get inside this particular area in here. So marking this across and just kind of eyeballing the levels, you're looking at roughly 37.97.50 up to, including the single prints, you're looking at 38.21. We would deem this weekly high in here to be important from previous weeks. I will just mark that out for you. We would deem that weekly high to be important, so that's in or around, we're pretty zoomed out here, but in and around the sort of 38.23 level, and that's a level that we were actually able to take a couple of very, very short-term scalps off at the tail end of this week. So that's the context we're coming in with in this new trading week. It's also a really, really busy week in that we've got quite a lot of earnings across the NASDAQ and the E-mini S&P. So just to run through a couple of the earnings from next week. On Tuesday, after the market closes, we have AMD and Microsoft reporting along with Starbucks. After the close on Wednesday is probably the biggest day of the week. We have Apple, Tesla, and Facebook all reporting. So some really, really big names across the NASDAQ and the E-mini S&P all reporting. So that's going to give us some added volatility next week. And depending on how the market responds to those respective companies' earnings, we may or may not see some downside levels being tested. Really, if some of the earnings we've seen over the past week are anything to go by, there's really nothing that's going to stop this juggernaut of a market from going higher. From a profile perspective, looking at the previous week in here, which was the week commencing Monday the 11th of January, we've had a value break last week, so the value has broken higher. So we can see this grey area marked out on all the TPOs up here. They're all in grey. That tells us that value has migrated higher. And then the fairest price to do business was at near the very top of the profile up here at 38.48. Which tells us that higher prices are being accepted between buyers and sellers. That's really all that's telling us, and that it feels like we're destined to just continue going higher. But as I said, coming in this week, this particular gap in the market will be interesting to see how price responds if and when we do get back in there. If we do get back in there, we'd hope to see it filled out, so it can build some good solid structure for any potential move higher. But if it doesn't, then we need to be prepared for that as well. And if it fails to fill and then rebounds, then we may just take that area as completely done and the market's moving on. Looking at things from a bird's eye view on a daily perspective, here's just how things played out this week. We can see down here, this is the Globex session from Monday, so we're not really paying much attention to that this week in our analysis. We can see here the profile on Tuesday, which was a bit of a B shape in a profile, and we closed in the middle of value, which was interesting because we've mentioned on previous videos that this whole area in here represents an area of balance, and the market has gone up through it, has tested some levels to the upside, a little bit of a poor high printed in there, so that's something that we potentially might see come back to and repaired. We've closed inside of value, so we would take that as a rejection of this particular candle in here from Friday the 15th. So this was a full day's worth of trade in here from Friday the 15th. We closed at some lows, and we would take that given that we had such an enormous gap higher on the Tuesday, bearing in mind that Monday was the markets were closed, we take the fact that the market has gapped higher back inside this balance area in here tells us that really we're heading for higher prices. This is a rejection of price down here. There's no one willing to step in and go short in any kind of a meaningful way, and it's not really behaving like a completely two-sided market. So that was a little bit of a signal on Tuesday that potentially we were going to see some higher prices. However, I don't think I really expected the day on Wednesday, given the fact that it was the inauguration day. Maybe I should have seen it, and that there would be some positivity around the inauguration. But we had a classic open drive, and we drove straight out of this balance area and had some big consolidation up here. When we look at the profile from Thursday, we had overlapping value on Thursday. But one thing which we'll look at when we get into more zoomed in version of the profile is we have a poor high up here, and that is really just some traders trapped at bad location, which we'll get into on the zoomed in version. And then on Friday, we came back down, and we actually tested, if we look at what the low was from Friday, so I will just mark out Friday in here, and then I'm just going to place a line against the low from Friday, and lo and behold, it corresponds with this particular high of the balance area. So again, it's telling us that that is a rejection back into the balance area. So we would start to think that potentially we are just going to see some higher prices next week regardless. Of course, we would love to see a filling in of this particular gap in here, but that's not to say that we're going to get that. So when we look at the zoomed in version of the profile, so where I'd like to start in the profile is here on, we can see, let's scroll all the way down here. We can see here on Monday, this is our shortened day down here. This is basically our overnight Globex session from Monday, which was an off day. And then on Tuesday, we had this sort of middling day where we got back into the balance area and closed inside the balance area. Then on Wednesday, we had the enormous gap higher, where we opened here. We tested some lows pretty quickly off the open, and then it was just driven higher. And we have some good excess up here at the highs, which tells us this is a completed auction. And then we had a little bit of a liquidation break as we went into settlement on the day, and we closed roughly in the middle of value, and our volume point of control, fairest price to do business, was up around 38.46. We had continuation of that on Wednesday, in that we had overlapping value between the 2 days, although with the volume point of control migrated lower by a couple of prices. Not the end of the world by any means for anyone in a bullish camp. But one of the things we did see was we were playing some of these single prints down here from F period. So these were good for some short-term trades. And then when we failed to see these fill in, you immediately start to think, there really is nothing stopping this market from going any higher. The market wants to fill these in. It attempted to fill these in, and it couldn't. And that was again another sign that potentially we were going to start seeing some higher prices. Now, when we got into the overnight session on Thursday, this is really interesting. This is the overnight session here, which I'm just breaking out for you here. And this is where pretty much 95% of the inventory taken in at these higher prices up here was roughly 95% short when we got into the cash open on Friday. So what we saw was that this move felt almost artificial in terms of this gap down. There was nothing in the way of bearish news to speak of, and we saw from the open that things weren't hugely strong, but things were bullish nevertheless. The real clue came in C period in here, where we put in a low of 1 tick above the overnight VPOC, but also we barely got inside these single prints over here, which is really, really interesting. That's telling us the market's incredibly bullish and we're likely to move higher. On Friday evening, at the close, we had our classic liquidation break, so an M and N period. This is really just traders who've been long during the week, and it has just sold off, and they're just taking profit. This isn't any kind of a bearish move or anything. This is literally just people getting out and taking profit. Simple as that. One of the nuances that we're going to pay attention to next week is the fact that on Thursday we put in a poor high, and this is where we have almost like a double top during the day, where we had D and M period print a high. And this is just traders trapped at bad location. These are traders who have maybe bought down here at the value area high, and the market just didn't go higher, and they've been forced out, and there was no continuation. So we would say that that is an unfinished auction, and there's a likelihood that the market will go back and repair that or re-auction those set of prices. So that would be something we're going to pay attention to next week. There may be a little bit of noise when the price if and when the price gets up there. So there may be a bit of people stepping in trying to short that. Could just be something to look out for. But that's again tells us that potentially higher prices are on the way. So that pretty much leaves us there for the week that's in it. Coming into next week, we're probably a little bit more in the bullish camp than we had been last week, but who's to say what's going to happen, depending on how the market responds to some of these big cap stock earnings come in this week. So we'll see how things really start to play out as the week unfolds. As always, if you want to learn a little bit more about Market Profile, go visit our website at sgfutures.com/education, where you can browse some of our Market Profile course material if you'd like to learn a little bit more. And we also ran some invite-only webinars recently, so feel free to drop onto the website, drop in some details, and we will ping you over a link to the webinar. It's all completely free. Feel free to sign up for the webinar on sgfutures.com/education. That just leaves me to wish you all a great week and happy trading.